if my
Thank you, everybody that is actually tuning into this stream. Probably my first YouTube stream I'll be doing. I'm gonna be more focused on actually uploading YouTube content as opposed to doing the live streams on there, but I figured I'd give it a shot anyway. Never hurts. Hopefully the audio quality is good and we can just go with that. And if it's not, then yeah, that sucks. Anyway, we're gonna grab a few, I was gonna wait for viewer-based uploads this time, but I figured that I could find some myself. Try to read some stuff that we haven't read recently. Oh, I need to get my rain going too. We have to have the rain noises. Alright, let's get right into the first interesting story we'll be doing. The story is called Grandpa Tucker's Lobster Bucket. It's submitted by user new to town 3 a.m. on the subreddit /r/nosleep. Actually has a couple of rewards from today, so that should be good. Let's give it a read. We were there every Friday night. It was never empty. Grandpa Tucker's famous homemade lobster biscuit drew visitors from far and wide and kept the locals coming back time and time again. He was a town treasure. People loved the eccentric restaurateur. He was well known for his black bowler hat and yellow checked shirt, tucked into his jeans concealing the matching suede yellow boots. It was the main reason I looked forward to our family's weekly outing. Grandpa Tucker was the life and soul of the party. He would bound around the crowded tables, laughing with his guests as they feasted. He boasted about the freshness of his food he was serving and how lobster was second to none. As I got older, I stopped joining my family for Friday night dinner. I wanted to spend my teenage years picking up girls and partying, not eating seafood with my mom and dad. It didn't stop me from hanging out at Grandpa Tucker's though. Instead, I spent time with friends behind the restaurant, smoking by the industrial bins. It was the perfect spot, and Grandpa almost never came out back. Was far too busy entertaining all the guests. There was only one other employee at the Lobster Bucket, Tucker's son, Dane. Dane was what the locals described as a little slow. He didn't have great social skills, and he wanted friends so badly that he was dangerously gullible. Tucker kept him close, and I couldn't blame him. Me and my friends were always nice to Dane. We'd show him music we were listening to and talk to him about sports. He really loved the feeling of being part of the group, and I genuinely liked the guy. In return, he never ratted us out for the weed. Me and my friend Kieran headed over there after a party once. It had been a disaster of a night, and neither of us had been successful with the girls. We wanted to sit into the open air and have a drink in the early hours before we snuck back home. The Lobster Bucket had stopped serving food hours before we arrived, but the lights were still on. I didn't think too much of it at first. It must be one hell of a cleanup operation for an old guy and his disabled son. It wouldn't have surprised me if they were open a little late either. I'd had few too many drinks, and the concrete ground swayed from side to side. Kieran laughed at me, but I could see that it was far worse than for where I was. I sat myself down on the floor and lit up a cigarette as I powered through my last can of beer. Damn, man, can you smell that? I could. It was a familiar, delicious smell that cut through the scent of booze and ash. Grandpa Tucker must have been making his food overnight. I raised an eyebrow slightly, wondering if we had just busted him lying about the freshness of his famous food. I giggled a little under my breath at the prospect. I could devour some of that right now. Think Grandpa would let us sample some? I laughed drunkenly, pretending to knock on the back door. Turning back to Kieran, I felt my heart drop to my asshole. He wasn't alone. Just to his left was a girl around our age, mascara smeared all over her face and her hands outstretched in front of her, bound with a cable tie. Shh! She hissed before either of us could scream. Please help me. They're crazy. I think they're gonna kill me. I tried to take in her words, but I could barely see. Whiskey blind, I turned to Kieran for some sort of response at the same time as the back door opened. A familiar, large, clumsy figure stumbled out, shutting it behind him. Dane, what's going on? Who's this girl? I looked at my innocent, gullible friend and back at the cable-tied girl who was now unsuccessfully trying to run. It took me a while, but eventually she hit the floor, and I realized that her ankles were tied as well. Dane had a look of terror in his face that I had never seen before. He looked how I imagined an antelope would seconds before the lion's teeth ripped into his flesh. I knew I had to change my approach. Hey man, it's us. You know us. We're not gonna hurt you. The girl sobbed on the ground. I started to shake on the inside. I wasn't sure if it was the blood alcohol content or the life and death situation, but I felt my skin crawl. Fuck that. What the fuck, Dane? This isn't right. Kieran interrupted as he stepped towards the hysterical girl and reached for his lighter to melt the plastic bindings. Stop, you aren't allowed to do that, Dane exclaimed, a manic look of fear in his eyes. He started jogging towards Kieran and I instinctively followed. Dane was a gentle giant. I truly believe that. But he was a giant. He didn't mean to knock Kieran to the ground, but one swipe of his arm against a weedy, drunk teen was enough. I tried to pull my friend up off the ground, and by the time I'd got him up and steadied us, Dane was dragging the girl back into the restaurant. The door locked behind him. Kieran went to pound on it, but I stopped him. You know, Dane, he didn't do that, and if his dad did that, we're in trouble. We need to call the police. We started to run towards the main road. The numbers on my phone moved across the screen as I carefully followed them, dialing 999. Before I could tell them what emergency service I needed, the front door of the lobster bucket opened with a ding that I had heard 1,000 times before. Grandpa Tucker still had his bowler hat on. His yellow check shirt was stained with various colors and ingredients. I hung up the phone discreetly. Boys, he beamed. You look a little worse for wear. I bet your parents wouldn't be too pleased. How about you come in for a glass of water? His previously warm smile seemed to lack the friendliness it once had. He wasn't the same benevolent figure I've always seen him as. No, Mr. Tucker, I think it's time we got home. Thank you, though. I stuttered and hiccuped, barely making it through my words. I insist. Tucker narrowed his eyes and raised a hand tip his bowler hat. And please, call me Grandpa. Reluctantly, I stepped inside. Kieran followed. The fear is mentally sobering, but it only further damaged my physical abilities. My legs were like jelly and I tried to take steps in a wonky world. It was the first time I'd ever seen the dining area empty before. Take a seat, he gestured to a booth near the entrance to the kitchen. I'll grab you both a drink. Mr. Tucker? Mr. Tucker? Who is that girl? Kieran interjected, unable to hold. Grandpa Tucker smiled and rolled his eyes. He turned around and sat opposite us, against placing his food-covered hands together on the table. My Dane. He may come across like a child, but he's a fully grown man. He can't get himself a girlfriend, though. There aren't many folk like him in this town. So you just kidnapped them? Kieran bit back. I imagined Dane getting lonely, telling his dad he wanted to spend time with a pretty girl. He had always been intrigued when he had girls hanging out with us out back, or if we showed him pictures of parties. I suppose everyone's got urges, but Kieran was right. It didn't account for the cable ties. It's a tad bit embarrassing, boys, but I paid for her. She's acting out a fantasy. I assure you what you saw was consensual play with a hooker. Dane panicked when he saw you. He was supposed to chase her around Backbib, didn't expect to see you guys out here so late. It made sense, and Tucker spoke with a calm confidence, the kind that I imagined wouldn't be there when discussing your grown child's sex habits with a couple of teenage boys. He was far too cool and collected for the situation. I wasn't buying his story, and I was growing more concerned that I couldn't hear anything. Was the girl okay? I was frozen to that old red booth seat, riddled with anxiety. Oh, and she was cable-tied for realism, right? I'm calling the police, Kieran scoffed, looking at his grandpa with contempt. He wasn't buying it either and reached in his pocket for his phone. Grandpa Tucker grinned, revealing his squeaky, clean, white teeth for the first time in all the years I'd eaten at the restaurant. I watched as he removed his black bowler hat. Underneath the hat was a balding head with gray tufty hairs around the side. Perfectly central were two long, thin antennae, crudely stitched into his head, moving in the air. Kieran fumbled with his phone and the old man broke out into hysterical laughter. It was mocking, maniacal, and malicious. I caught a glimpse of the kitchen door where Dane stood in the glass window watching us with terror in his eyes. I realized that we were in huge trouble. At lightning speed, Grandpa Tucker reached across the table and snatched Kieran's phone from his hand. As he retracted his arm, I realized that Kieran's hands were tied just like the woman's had been. It didn't make sense. No one could do that so fast. I got up and ran towards the exit as Kieran screamed, but I felt two muscular arms close around me. Dane, please don't do this, I begged, craning my neck to look at my captor. He had tears in his eyes. He felt guilty, but he was doing what he was told. As always. Realizing that he wasn't going to help me, I inhaled and prepared to die at the hands of this community pillar. I envisioned my family being told that I gotten too drunk and probably wandered into a ditch somewhere. Was this what happened to some of the missing people you hear about? Kidnapped by a monster with antennas sewed into its head? I was dragged to the kitchen just behind Kieran, confronted with a large industrial-sized cooking pot, next to step ladders across them. I knew immediately why the girl really had been in the back of the restaurant. 1,000 Friday night dinners rose like bile in my stomach. I threw up all over myself and Dane. Don't pretend you didn't enjoy it, Aaron. It was such a shame when you stopped joining your family for dinner. Perhaps you can join them just once more? Grandpa Tucker sang his words as the two protrusions on his head danced from the symphony. I thought of my mother, lapping up her lobster bisque with delight. I thought about the possibilities of Grandpa that he had just inferred. Soon I was tied next to Kieran in the corner of the kitchen floor. Turn it on, Dane. We're behind schedule. How are we supposed to feed the town tomorrow if we don't get cracking? He cocked his head backwards and laughed hysterically again as he disappeared to what looked like a walk-in freezer. Dane turned a dial on the wall, igniting a flame under the ginormous pot. Tucker led the girl out, her tears frosted in the trail down her face. You should feel honored, boys. There aren't many I've shared my secret recipe with, and they sure as hell aren't around to shout about it. The flames underneath the pot roared, and it wasn't long before it was bubbling, spitting, scalding drops all directions. Grandpa Tucker licked his lips as the pot struggled to contain the boiling liquid. He pulled the girl close to him from behind and unhinged his jaw. I gasped as his mouth widened, accommodating the cold and terrified girl's hair and framing her face. He sucked and crunched on it as she screamed. Before she dropped to the floor, scalped, Tucker belched in satisfaction. We wriggled and fought the plastic ties, but it was all worthless. I could feel the circulation in my hands and feet restricting. They were just starting to go purple. Get up, Tucker hissed at the girl, helping her off the ground, pushing her at the stepladder. After she fell, at the first one, he grabbed a knife and snipped the plastic holding her feet together so she could ascend easier. I tried to look away. I watched Tucker's son instead, how uncomfortable he looked. I wonder if there is any hope of us escaping if we could get through to Dane. The girl wasn't from around here. I would have bet anything I had that it was harder for Dane to get on board with the cooking people than he knew. Then there was a scream. I've heard it's pretty horrific listening to a lobster boil, but die-hard fans swear there is another way to cook it that will produce the tender, beautiful meat that people expect when they order this luxury item. It sickened me, but as the girl boiled alive, I wondered if the same was true of people. Kieran was up next. The scalping was quick and ravenous. Grandpa Tucker slurped every bit of hair and flesh as if it was a delicious oyster. This is gonna be the best batch we've ever made, kid. Tucker turned to high-five Dane, who held his hand out as it was routine, a learned behavior. The poor guy clearly never knew any different. I felt my insides scrunch tightly as a second scream filled the room, and I listened to my best friend cry out as the skin melted and fused with muscle and bone. Knowing that I was going to be next. Grandpa Tucker came towards me. My breathing was so heavy I was sure I was going to hyperventilate and pass out. I felt his antenna wriggle against my face, and then the room started to fill with light spots. It was a strange euphoric feeling, which I suppose I can attribute to the lack of oxygen. Thud. That's the sound Grandpa Tucker made as he hit the floor next to me. I gasped, desperate for air as the room started to normalize again. Dane stood behind him, holding a large knife. It was bloodied with green, gooey matter coating it, not at all reminiscent of the human brain. The membrane substance watched the one leaking from the back of Grandpa's Tucker caved-in skull. Whatever Tucker was, it wasn't entirely human at all. Dane didn't take his eyes off his dad as he spoke. I wasn't supposed to go on the computer, but I did it anyway. I read that some folk kill lobsters with a knife through the brain before they cook them so they don't suffer. I didn't like the noise they made when they suffered. I was in pure shock. I know that I should have called the police and told them what happened and offered some closure to Kieran's family, and God knows how many others. But if I told on Grandpa Tucker, then Dane was going to get the punishment. He didn't deserve it. He was as much of a victim as the monster he lived with every pot of bisque was. And he saved my life. Instead, I helped him up. We disposed of Tucker in the only place that we could, the pot. Then we scrubbed the place down. I remember my sympathy for the two men cleaning the restaurant alone every night and felt cruel irony as I wiped blood off the floor. Tucker's disappearance shook the town. Kieran's disappearance on the same night only added to the intrigue. I got back before my parents woke up and swore blind that I left my friend wandering home. He was alive. That lie has never gotten easier. People rallied around Dane and the rumors flew. Did he leave because he couldn't handle his son anymore? Did he abduct Kieran? Was he dead somewhere in the woods? I'm sure I even heard alien abduction. The police never found a fucking thing. But then, who would check the bisque? It was easier when me and Dane reopened the lobster bucket. No scandal. The town were eager to support the tragic young lad, continuing the family business that had once been so successful. They supported me too. I became somewhat of a town hero, handling the parts of management that Dane couldn't. We sampled real lobsters. We really tried to do things the right way. But nothing ever tasted the same. So despite all the trauma, we reverted to the original recipe. I hate myself, and I hate my life. But I really love that Grandpa Tucker's famous lobster. You know, good story. A little weird. All the alien ones always end up a little weird like that too, so I don't know. I'm just gonna read through a few of these real quick just to make sure they're good. A little bit shorter stories, but this one's actually pretty long. Maybe we will read it. I don't know. Let's take a look. This one's also from /r/nosleep. User is Joseph Plays. It was actually posted today. It's a nice fresh story for everybody. I met someone calling themselves the Umbrella Man, and they changed my life for the best. That's the title of that one, so there we go. I was 14 years old when I ran away from home. I took nothing with me. It would only slow me down. Sprinting down the door and across the path, turning out to the pavement of the road of our neighborhood. My father had tried to swing at me to stop me from getting far, but the second I was on the street, my parents were screaming slurs at me and I knew I'd already won. My name is Nicole, and this is the day I met a person named simply the Umbrella Man. They'd finally been exposed for the years of abuse. Coming out had been the driving force of my escape. They'd finally shown their true colors as well, and the scars on my body were going to be proof of their insolence. I wanted to stay to see what they had to say for themselves, but the psychological abuse would have brought me back inside. So I ran. I ran for 5 minutes straight. My body was thin and frail, and that was the way they wanted it to be. They wanted to keep me forever. A little punching bag that they could make excuses for over and over again. I had my knee broken by my father when I was 7. He'd taken a hammer to it for talking back, for telling him I wanted to take part in the Olympics. A single dream crushed in a moment, and the doctor never doubted it had been an incident at school because I'd never told them otherwise. A drunkard and a druggie. That's who I'd grown up with. My lungs begged for air as I finally slipped into the broken down bus stop, sitting there, barely breathing in between sobs. Nobody around me heard it. nobody would have cared, in my mind. The rain began after, starting as no more than a trickle, before building into a horrific storm that lashed at my face. I tried hiding under the metal bar for sitting, to no avail. The windows had been smashed by youths trying to rebel. I had wanted to be like that once. I held my own against the torrent for a good few minutes. The rain hurt, like 1,000 daggers smashing against my body, each one reminding me of why my parents had held me back in the first place. I was all but ready to go home to see the carnage. I probably wouldn't have survived. At least, that's the way it had been. Fully soaked, I was ready to drown, but that was never the way it was going to go. Suddenly the rain stopped. At least that's what I thought had happened in my mind. It was only when I looked up and saw the looming shadow of another person sitting above me that I finally felt afraid. From bottom to top, he was wearing a clashing sight. His shoes were dirty and cobbled, and the rain splashing them as they tapped the tune. He wore no socks. Instead, I saw the skin go into the shoe, uncomfortably tucked like the shoe was too small. He wore shorts that would be more fitting for a summer breeze, instead in the dead of a thunderstorm. Not even the hair on them were sticking up. I didn't see what else he was wearing, save the large black raincoat that was covered up everything else, up to his neck where his hood was pulled over to hide the hair. What was curious was the large blue umbrella, which the rain beat senseless and showed no give, was made of concrete. When he realized what was shivering below his feet, he finally looked down, and inside the hood was a beard connected to a mustache that I swore looked way too familiar. I put my head down, covering with my hands like I was going to do anything. "Hello, Nicole." Immediately, my eyes widened, and I looked up again finally to look into his eyes. I got lost in them. Big, brown, friendly, and inviting. And accepting. Like he was going to tell me that everything was okay without ever moving his lips. Of course, I had bigger issues. You know my name?" "I do," he replied softly. His voice, I couldn't describe the way it spoke, like a beam of sunlight in the darkness, and also like a single dragging nail on a chalkboard. And I know other things too. "Who are you?" I asked, shaking, as he stood and crouched to extend his hand to help me up. "I don't know," he replied. "Many simply call me the Umbrella Man." Sure enough, I took his hand like he expected, and he held me to my feet. I must have looked a mess, a sniveling child coated in water from head to toe from being late. And then we were walking. I don't know what compelled me to walk with him. Stranger danger had been hammered into my head over and over again, essentially translating to "don't let others know." But I listened to him, and in an instant, he was like an older brother, the kind you'd follow to the end of the earth because you know he just wanted to make you smile. My mind carried me as I followed him, still dripping with raindrops. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Home." He must have felt me froze. "Not your home, Nicole. My home." I responded. "Your home?" It's what I said. His voice was soft, vampiric in nature, inviting me to sit on every word, each one a story of its own. "I'm simply showing you what you deserve to see." "You said you know things." I was still so scared to speak, even if everything he was doing warranted me to trust him. I couldn't find myself doing it just yet. How much do you know?" "I know you're afraid." He was right, and I shifted nervously under his gaze as he looked over, but still pulled over his ears. "And that you don't know what life holds for you." "Yes," I responded. "It's okay to feel that." I blinked. Why? Why did hearing that from him feel so much different to hearing it from my own therapist? Like, I could actually trust these words for once. "Many people feel scared, Nicole," the Umbrella Man continued. "You are one of many people in this world who, especially at your age, are forgotten and accepted by life. because of another person holding you back. I remembered that I wasn't trying to keep up with someone here. He was walking my speed, and even slowed down when I finally revealed the limp that my father had given me. The umbrella he held didn't even feel like protection anymore. It was just like a roof over my head, housing a loving parental figure. I hadn't felt that, not since I was born. You still care for your parents. He sniped me with that phrase as we turned towards a large highway of the road that acted as if my back garden. Even after everything they did for you. That wasn't him telling me that. That was him just knowing. Sure enough, Stockholm Syndrome had hit me too hard. I found myself crying at the possibility of losing them. When suddenly, the umbrella man held his umbrella sideways, the action blocking incoming waves of water that soaked only him. I couldn't help myself. I laughed, the tears mixing with the water. And though it wasn't like mine, the umbrella man laughed too. It had taken such a simple, involuntary moment, but I had seen something that I would not expect. The umbrella man was not an alien. He was not a demon, nor an angel, nor a mixture of the pair. He was human, just like me, and evidence piled against him as I continued my walk. He would shift the umbrella from shoulder to shoulder, uncomfortable with the metal bar. Whenever he spoke, he'd pull back his hood slightly to look at me and make sure he was saying the right. When a large vehicle would drive past with him closer to the road the entire walk up, he'd flinch and walk slightly in the direction away from the road. And yet, whenever I could cry, something would happen that would make me laugh. I would tear up at the thought of what was going to happen to my parents, and his umbrella would drag along the trees or make a strange sound. I'd get ready to sob into the air about what little I could do without them, and a large gust of wind would invert his umbrella, and he'd struggle with it for a second and just put his tongue out. He made me laugh when I would cry, and it never occurred to me why until later on. There was just one thing I didn't understand. When we passed someone else on the road, there was a few, he'd pull his hood over his eyes so that they couldn't see him. The umbrella would go over the people's heads and never hit them, and the second they were behind us, he'd let go of his hood, talking to me kindly once more. It was when the rain became nothing more than the puttering of what we turned off into a freeway, and into the neighborhoods I'd seen before. We walked along the keep our meeting a secret, okay? With nothing else to say, I nodded, confused. He left me with one final piece of advice. The storm that brews in your heart could level the shores of the coast. It's up to you to see the lighthouse through the clouds. I heard the door unlock to the house I stood in front of, and my head swiveled to see my grandmother come out of the door. Nicole? I turned back, ready to say goodbye to the umbrella man, and I saw that he was gone, no longer there. I think I noticed him walk up the street, but I couldn't be sure as my grandmother tackled me into a hug, crying into my ear about how sorry she was. Sure enough, it's been 10 years. And I am the happiest I've ever been. After everything that had happened, my parents were put behind bars. They still serve time for the child abuse to this day. My grandmother and grandfather raised me acceptingly and lovingly, doing everything they could to train me for my life ahead. I finished school with the grades I wanted, moved on to college, and finished that too. Met the love of my life in university, a woman, and a perfect woman at that, and got married 3 years after that. We're expecting our first child in April through artificial insemination. I wish I could name them after the umbrella man. I never did see him after that. Life had only looked up because he was on to find me. Sometimes I ponder late at night what would have happened if he never found me. Would have I survived? Would have I even made it past my neighborhood? Was I the only person he's ever helped? The term, it gets better, it never really appealed to me. To go from the lowest point in my life to the highest of highs, it was a miracle. But I will say something. At least I was able to take flight. At least I was able to make it to the bus stop where I'd wanted to wait, possibly die just to get out of the iron grips of my parents. But people don't just meet the Umbrella Man. Storms don't usually call upon guardian angels. It just so happened mine was human. That those lake brown eyes were so trustworthy. Where's the creepy part of this? Why would you put this in No Sleep? This is trash. It's just trash. Have to read some messages real quick. I already like the title of this one because me and my girlfriend actually watched a video of something similar to this. And it's called "Something in My House Keeps Opening Doors While I Sleep." There's this YouTube video of this guy. It's called like the Slamming Door Man or whatever, but it's pretty good to watch. I'd recommend it if you haven't seen it already. Gotta close out of Facebook though. That's insane. This is like the creepiest song I have on my playlist for sure. But it's just from a stupid movie, so. Alright guys, I think I'm gonna do some recording for some of my YouTube videos, so I'm gonna hop off here now. I just wanted to do some test streams.